"2020 has been a year of extremes. We have experienced a global pandemic, an economic crisis, severe social unrest, and a tragic loss of life. Throughout history, events like these have served to unite us, but today it seems we all feel almost an overwhelming sense of division. Yet, amidst that backdrop, here in Massachusetts, we have seen a community come together with compassion and shared purpose for the common good. It's a story we felt had to be told, in part because this is a unique moment in time, but also because this moment in time extends from our past and into our future. It's a story about a crisis and the response, but also about the healthcare supply chain, American manufacturing, and an innovation ecosystem. In Massachusetts, we've done a lot of things well, and those lessons should be shared. Ultimately, we hope Project Frontline is a vehicle for thoughtfulness and discussion about building our future together. We're going to jump right into our panel with a quick round of introductions. If you could just start by introducing yourselves and your organization, that would be great.
Sure. I'm Mike Kennealy. I'm the Secretary of Housing and Economic Development for the Commonwealth.
I'm Mark Keroack. I'm President and CEO of Baystate Health.
I'm Julie Chen, Vice Chancellor for Research, Innovation, and Economic Development at the University of Massachusetts, Lowell.
Carolyn Kirk, Executive Director of the MassTech Collaborative.
I'm Brian Johnson. I'm the President of MassMEDIC. We're the Medical Device Industry Council of Massachusetts.
I'm Darlene Rodowicz. I'm the Executive Vice President for Berkshire Health Systems.
Thank you. So I'd like to start with an open question to the panel. What did you think of the episode? Do you have any reactions to it? As you think back to the early days of the MERT and the COVID-19 crisis, does this feel like an accurate portrayal of that period of time? Brian, you want to?
It's interesting to go back to what was probably one of the most frightening periods of my life in many years. I think it was it brought me right back to that immediate sense of terror and sort of uncertainty. It was really interesting because, here we are in September, we're talking about what happened in March and April. And, you thought during those days we might be past this by now, or I guess that was kind of the hope, right, of our most sort of naive hopes. But I think it brought me right back for sure.
Carolyn, you want to add some comments?
Sure. I think Dr. Zeidel reminds us that some of us were strangers at the outset, and we did not know each other. The manufacturing community, through the Advanced Manufacturing Collaborative, there was so much camaraderie, but as the experts came into the MERT, we were strangers, and we just all took a leap of faith that we were going to contribute to the crisis in as quickly as we possibly could, and that's what we did.
Julie?
Yeah, just building on what Carolyn said, I think it brought back that feeling of, wow, everybody wanted to figure out how they could help. And everybody did. Everybody pitched in and figured out, I can help here, you can help there. And I think it speaks to the great ecosystem we have in this state, that we have folks from all different sectors figuring out how do they make a difference.
Great, thank you. So we have some questions rolling in from the audience here. So a good one on startups. The question is, it would be great to hear the panelists' thoughts regarding the role for startup companies in the development of new delivery models and new healthcare solutions. So I think maybe Brian, Julie, perhaps Carolyn, maybe Secretary Kennealy could all pitch in. Does someone want to?
Sure. I think.
Yeah, Brian, why don't you go?
Would you like me to do it? The degree of difficulty on the panel is a little different now that we're all socially distant, but I think certainly we need new and innovative thoughts. We need new and innovative technologies. I think the the crisis added a lot of dry powder to technologies and companies that were out there, and maybe vaccine development wasn't a sexy space, or some of the other technologies certainly. God, I mean, did we ever think pulse oximetry would be such a incredible world dependent technology? So I think the crisis has definitely created new needs and also new opportunities for old technologies.
Secretary Kennealy?
Well, I mean, the role of the startups is absolutely essential. I mean, we got to keep innovating. We got to keep solving problems. You think about the innovation ecosystem here in the Commonwealth. You have startup companies, established companies, academia, government. That is the complete ecosystem there. And it's really, we got to keep developing the talent to develop those innovations too. So the role of the startups is an essential part of the ecosystem, an essential part of solving these problems.
And one of the things that we found out during the crisis, the startups came out of the woodworks in terms of great ideas. We weren't as good at helping them to convert to manufacturing real products in the timeline that we had. And so I think it made us realize that we can build more on this innovation ecosystem we have in the state by helping our startups more quickly translate to a manufacturing environment.
Great. So we have 2 questions here for Boyd Technologies, which I'll field. The first is what we're manufacturing to help address COVID. Our business is a contract development and manufacturing firm in the medical and life sciences space. So most of what we do touches healthcare in some way. Specifically related to this project, we're producing surgical masks and N95 respirators, and also doing a lot of work with component materials that support vaccine development. The second question for me, and then I'll come back to you. Did you read? Oh, no. Okay. Is about the focus of our next Frontline episode. Our next episode will focus on manufacturers. There's over 50 who engaged with the MERT, the MERT group, and we're going to highlight a number of those stories, talk about some of the challenges, some of the successes, and where we are in establishing this manufacturing as we go forward. There are a couple other questions here that I want to jump to. So the next one is about students in the university setting. So the question is, how do you think the challenges related to bringing students back to the university setting will impact vis-a-vis lab access, et cetera? Julie, maybe you want to address this. I know we actually talked during our interview a lot about the challenges of labs and during the shutdown and whatnot.
Yeah, so like everybody else, when in March, we shut down like everybody else did, but we realized that the labs were probably the safest place in the university because the researchers were used to wearing PPEs and the ventilation was better, in fact, in the lab setting. So a lot of what we did was to slowly, I think like everybody else, like the state did, have phases of folks coming back into the research labs. The medical labs never really shut down because they needed to help us with those solutions that they were developing. And so I think it was very much a case of the most urgent things kept going, the next level slowly came back in, and now we're pretty much in the research labs at the same rate we were before COVID, just a little bit more socially distant, and obviously everybody wearing PPEs.
Great, thank you, Julie. So there's a question here, Dr. Keroack, I was thinking you could jump in. There's a lot of focus on PPE. What about other supplies such as IV bags, needles, et cetera?
Well, I think some of the standard supplies are really in good supply. The really critical things that we're worried about every day is the testing materials, the ability to have the right reagents, the right swabs, the right media, and these are going to be much harder to manufacture by some startup kind of company. We're having to deal with a limited number of platforms and technologies, and that really is the stuff that's keeping us up at night these days.
Great, thank you.
I would just add to that, it seems to me like it's a balance between PPE and testing kits. And we're really struggling, as Mark says, to find an adequate supply of testing kits that can have a quick response. And our worry in the winter is if we have another outbreak of COVID in Massachusetts, the testing turnaround time will continue to grow and the need for PPE will become a big issue for us again. So right now we're managing it well, but it's this balance all the time between PPE and testing. And so, we don't have both in a good spot at the moment.
One of the other product areas that the MERT did focus on was ventilators, and that was one of the big challenges and the big fears. And there were 4 categories that we were looking at. One was the traditional ventilator, and we have worked with a manufacturer that has made almost 6,000 here in Massachusetts. And then there were the disposable parts of ventilators that were starting to be of concern. So we were looking at how to, if we had to, how could we get a manufacturer to reverse engineer some of the disposable parts? And then there was the refurbishment. So if the hospital had ventilators but were not in operation, was there a way we could get them refurbished? And then we had a number of innovative ventilator solutions that came forward. So that was another category of product beyond PPE that we were focused on.
Great, thank you. So we've got a bunch of questions here that I'm going through. So Secretary Kennealy, I think this would be a good one for you. There's actually two questions here. The first is there an opportunity to share our learnings with other states? Any thoughts on that?
Well, sure. I would say that we got a lot of questions from other states about how we did this, and because it started to get some visibility and real traction. And what I always said in explaining it was that, the effort didn't start in March. The effort started years ago. And these relationships that have been a part of our fabric for a long time, the way we've developed strategies around innovation, and again, the collaboration of business and government and academia, our advanced manufacturing collaborative has been with us now for a long time. The great academic partnerships. So it's been with us for a long time, was a natural outgrowth of these relationships. So I would say, if you want to stand up something like this, you need to start with that level of collaboration.
Great. Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, it reminds me of sort of the kind of a wiseacre comment, right? How do you become a millionaire? Well, you start with $1 million. I'm not sure if anybody ever actually said that, but we sort of started this process already on third base, I would say, because we had spent the last 30 years building a unique advantage in advanced technology and medical technology, biotech, diagnostics. And, I think one of the things that other states could learn from us is that I think what was done really well in the process here was when the stuff hit the fan, people put aside during the initial part, they put aside sort of everything and work together. And I think that was incredibly unique. You don't often get heads of hospitals and things like that talking to medical suppliers, and you don't often sort of get the governor calling and saying, I need the CEO of Hologic or something, and then that happens. I think that what other states could learn is that we put aside some of the silos and work together. But I think our advantage was already really inherent. We're the number one biotech manufacturer in the world. We're the number 2 or number 3 largest medical device market in the world. I mean, you can't just build that overnight. That's 30 years of public investment. That's the creation of MassMEDIC, MassBio, coming out of these economic development vehicles. It's about sort of the long-term investments a state will make, and Massachusetts made those investments to their credit, and that's why we're where we're at.
And just to add to that, it is so true that the state investment is what made it possible for us to ramp things up so quickly. If the state, on the testing side alone, if the state hadn't invested in AFOA, bringing that Manufacturing USA Institute to Massachusetts, if they hadn't invested money at the UMass Lowell Fabric Discovery Center, that laid the foundation so that along with MIT and MIT Lincoln Labs gave us the ability to have the technical expertise and the physical space and the people to be able to ramp up the testing capability alone because of that state investment.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. So I think this is a great question. It's a little bit what we've talked about, sort of MERT 3.0. The question is, has this experience created any type of pandemic protocol that will help us continuously improve response and agility? Maybe you want to jump in, Carolyn?
Yeah, we had so many partners who joined the MERT, and the leads, UMass Lowell, MIT, WPI, and MassTech. We actually wrote a National Science Foundation grant. Julie took the lead on it, and we won it. And the objective of the grant is to document what took place for the MERT, to be able to systematize and implement for future types of crises, to galvanize manufacturing and problem solving in this and so we're excited to see what that grant will produce, and to have that recognition from the National Science Foundation is just great.
Dr. Keroack?
I think the other thing that's important to realize is that we've made relationships as a result of the pandemic that never existed before. I mean, for hospital CEOs or health system CEOs to be calling advanced manufacturers, to be calling laboratorians, for us, there's another dimension to this, that connecting the hospitals to the public health infrastructure, to the media. There's almost a sort of central nervous system that's developed as a result of this, so that the second time this happens, God forbid, I won't be making friends for the first time.
Secretary Kennealy?
I think that's right. I think this effort will continue, and it's only going to strengthen our manufacturing ecosystem here. I mean, to Dr. Keroack's point, that the new relationships as well as the old relationships, it's only gotten more powerful. And I think it's really putting Massachusetts on the map where perhaps it might have been before around manufacturing. It's been a natural strength of ours for a long time. We're probably better known for some other things, but we are a great manufacturing state with great companies like Boyd and many others. And this is truly a statewide opportunity. We're here today in the western part of the state, obviously, and we're a strength in manufacturing and technology really all across the Commonwealth.
So this next question, I'm going to jump in and give an answer for the first part, but then I think there's probably a couple other people who might want to jump in. The question is, what complexity was involved in trying to navigate the changing FDA regulations? As a manufacturer, we are involved in the medical industry, so we have the internal procedures and staff to go through the normal FDA regulatory process. I think in our view of it, the FDA did a lot of things really well early on to establish emergency use authorizations so that companies could put products into the market. And I think that the challenges related to that are really around making sure that those products are safe and effective. And I know for us as a manufacturer, as a contract manufacturer, that's what we do every day. And so that, in some sense came sort of naturally to us. And that's part of the reason that this response takes time. A surgical mask is a medical device and it has to be regulated. And I think that's a much heavier lift for some companies who may not be a startup or a company that is not as experienced with the FDA landscape. But I can say our experience where we did need support interpreting the EUAs and working with the FDA, again, the MERT process, whether it was members of the MERT through academia or industry, we got a lot of support there that I think really moved the timeline quickly. Does anybody else want to add to that? Yeah, Carol.
Yeah, so the collaborative really was the infrastructure, and off of that collaborative, the network just was built and the experts came forward for the MERT. So Ben Linville Engler, who is with MIT's System Design and Management Department, he has 10 years in a medical device company as their federal FDA regulator guy. He is the subject matter expert, and he was our person on point for this. And he had a weekly call and established relationships with folks at the FDA, and he was monitoring the EUAs as they were coming out and being in touch with the companies. So again, it's that benefit of the ecosystem that we have that was brought to bear on behalf of the effort. And if Ben's watching, Ben, he was in the film. Just yeoman's work, lots of nights and weekends.
Yeah, Dr. Keroack.
I think the other thing that has to be said is that while a lot of the manufacturing in Massachusetts was very sophisticated, we really were talking about working with commodities and manufacturing at scale. One of the early conversations I had with Steve Boyd helped me to realize that it wasn't going to be every manufacturer that was going to be able to step up and make millions and millions of devices from fairly basic materials. And I think, Carolyn, in your experience, you started with hundreds of people who were interested and willing, and came down to just a few dozen who were actually able to do it at scale and in the huge numbers we needed.
Yeah, Carolyn.
Yeah, so we had a portal that was set up through mass.gov, and over 900 companies came through wanting to make PPE, and over 500 were from Massachusetts. And it was like finding a needle in a haystack, though, because we had to find companies, and this is the middle of the crisis in April, March, while the surge is happening, that could they pivot at scale and quickly? And it came down to about 50 companies that went through that. I call it the Merck gauntlet of the quality standards, the regulatory hurdles, the testing hurdles, and then the actual labeling was a big deal to make sure that when you received the product in the hospital, you knew how it was packaged and labeled and how to use it. So that was very important to that vetting process.
Great. So I have another question here, which I'll just add some thoughts to also, but it's what resources, grants, et cetera, are out there now for entrepreneurs and manufacturers to continue innovating? And I would just say from our experience, if you're interested in the medical industry and you're not a member of MassMEDIC, you should be. It's been a great network and resource for us. Mass Life Sciences has been a huge resource for us as a company, and the MassTech Collaborative. And there's a lot of others, so I'll let the experts step in, but those are just three of, I guess actually I would also say MassMEP is an organization in the state. When we became a medical device manufacturer and got our ISO 1345 certification, it was MassMEP that wrote the grant, did the training with us, and helped us implement that quality system. Do you want to?
I'll kick it off. I mean, you hit on a lot of them. Mass Life Sciences Center has been with us now for 10 years. It's our public-private agency focused on growing the life sciences sector. It provides capital support for research institutions and companies. And a place we're sitting in right here today, the Berkshire Innovation Center. And MassTech Collaborative. Carolyn can talk about those programs, but also a lot of support for innovation and companies there. We committed about $100 million of manufacturing R&D dollars to what we call M2I2, the Massachusetts Manufacturing Innovation Initiative. There's a variety of advanced manufacturing training grants as well. So we have a lot of supports. And the focus really is on how do we make sure we stay on the cutting edge of research and development? How do we make sure we provide supports for our companies and make sure we can supply the workforce as well?
Yeah, I think the question is really is sort of what resources are out there, right, for startups looking to get into this fight. Well, I think you have to really, at this point, you have to be pretty smart about where you're targeting. I don't think there's a whole lot of money out there to pivot to make face shields. But certainly we need new and innovative ways to detect the virus. I think testing, there's an enormous constellation of funding opportunities through the federal government and any number of areas, private investment to help speed up testing. I think clearly we don't have a vaccine yet, and we need the only way to really fight this is to know who has it. So I would say, you know, if you're looking for an area, find the place where we're falling down and failing, and we're still failing in testing as far as I'm concerned. So do whatever you can to fill that gap. There is need and there's opportunity, and that's all you need in a startup is need and opportunity, and then you get the money and you do it.
So the MassTech Collaborative has, I had said we had over 500 companies from Massachusetts, but not all made it through the gauntlet. So we've stood up a program to support companies who also want to innovate and pivot. And we're running $25,000 challenges, which isn't a ton of money, but it's enough to get someone excited and to take that leap in their innovation. And it has to be either to support the reopening of the economy or slow the spread. And we will have a special contest just for entrepreneurs with a $50,000 prize. The first prizes are for established companies who are innovating from within, and then we'll do a one for startups as well.
And another thing, the federal government obviously has been providing some funding that flows through the state. So for example, rapid diagnostics, as Brian said, is an area that we think there's still a need. And so M2D2, which is a medical device incubator, that's a collaboration between the UMass Medical School and UMass Lowell, which also has received some state funding to set it up, just got a large grant from NIH to support companies that are involved in rapid acceleration of diagnostics. So that's a program that is available to a lot of our companies in this state.
Great. So I think this is a good question about hospital supplies here. So during the Ebola outbreak years back, all hospitals started to build large containment systems and stockpiled supplies to support staff at facilities. How did we use those supplies, and what did we learn about quantities needed for true outbreaks like COVID-19? Was there a protocol that could or was implemented to use those supplies? So I think generally, you know, the stockpiling of supplies and, you know, where we go from here.
Well, Ebola, of course, was a bit of a false alarm in the United States. We had a couple of cases in Houston, I believe. Baystate in Springfield was one of only 10 federally funded units that was constructed to deal with Ebola. And we trained up 60 or 70 individuals. The requirements for PPE against Ebola are much more rigorous than they are for COVID. And I think there was that interest that remained. We really didn't learn an awful lot about stockpiling because it was a false alarm from a supply side. However, the muscle memory was there. We continued to have a small team of people that was interested in special pathogens. And so back in early January, they were issuing alerts about COVID when most of us didn't realize it was going to be a real threat. I'm not sure that we really learned many lessons about supply chain from Ebola, unfortunately.
Yeah. I would say, you know, we did have a stockpile. All hospitals have a stockpile for the emergency management needs. But when you get into a pandemic like COVID, and at the beginning, we didn't know if it was droplet or aerosolizing. And we were going through the N95 respirators at warp speed, pace we'd never seen before. And we had actually spent from December through, you know, March 7th, when our first patient was identified in our hospital, stockpiling and building our stockpiles. At that point, though, you have to remember that the virus started in China and then made it into Italy and Europe. And so whatever was in the US you could get. And then after that, it was, you know, we were all competing with one another and trying to be as creative as possible to find whatever product we could find. So I don't know that we've learned all of our lessons before this. We've certainly learned a lot of lessons right now about how much you need to have on the shelf. And then also to make sure that you really understand the full supply chain, and not just what you're getting from your manufacturers, but where it's coming from, and where they get the products to make what we need, what we consider a commodity. It turns out to be a pretty critical component of beating a virus like this.
Okay, we have another question here, which I'm going to take a crack at. The question is, we have lost over 200,000 to this disease with a projection of over 400,000 by year end. Can the manufacturing community accelerate efforts to reduce the chances of this progression? And and I'd open it up to anyone else. I think from our perspective as a manufacturer, if you go back to mid-March, or early March, the first thing to happen was finished goods supply ran short, right? There was no more product that we could import from overseas. The next thing that happened in about probably 5 days for us, from maybe March 15th to March 20th, was the raw material supply went completely dry. We had suppliers who had supply for us on March 15th, and by the 20th, they were telling us that they were done taking orders for 2020 in March. And then it was equipment. When we started going out looking for new equipment, we engaged with equipment suppliers we work with. Lead times were normal, then they were extreme, then they were completely shut down for the year. So all of those things impact how the manufacturing community can address this, and it takes time. A normal lead time for us, for equipment is well over 6 months to arrive at our facility. A normal lead time for a validation program for a medical device is 12 to 18 months minimum. Raw materials, all of these things impact our ability to respond. So, and I can say from the 50 manufacturers that are working with the MERT program, it's every day and every night. We're doing everything we can. And I do think over the next 6 to 12 months, we'll start to see those solutions really come online in high volume. But it does take time. Brian, did you want to?
Yeah, first I wanted to say thank you for saying that about the 200,000 lives lost. I think so often we amazingly forget the fact that 200,000 people are dead in the United States. How many of those died unnecessarily, died before their time? I don't know, but I know that there's not over 9,000 members of our Commonwealth who are no longer here, who were here when this journey began. And I think we need to recognize that. Can we manufacture our way out of it? I don't know. I think we can innovate our way to quicker solutions. Can we manufacture our way to getting more people to be compliant, to wear masks, to do the simple stuff to prevent further spread? That's not a question of manufacturing. It's a question of human nature and will and testing all the things that we're bad at, staying the course. But you're absolutely right. What COVID uncovered was we have a frail supply chain in medtech. These are very advanced instruments that are often pieced together by components that are made in all far corners of the world. And I think a lot of people will be very surprised to find that occasionally on very advanced pieces of medical technology, there is only one person in some far off village that makes a piece of material that is needed to make an incredibly advanced piece of machinery that costs well over 6 figures to be manufactured. And this is not advanced. A lot of medical technology is not what we think of rolling things off the line. A lot of medical technology is almost handcrafted. It's people sitting there piecing these things together. And you look at your basic endoscope, and there's got to be tens of thousands of microfiber cameras in that. So this is an incredibly complex stuff, and we have a very stringent regulatory system, which needs to be, because we have to make sure that what we're putting into patients is safe as well as effective. So, I think we have the will to manufacture and innovate incredible ideas. Does that mean we can just manufacture our way to this being over? No.
So
Carolyn?
the question that we got over and over again from the manufacturers who pivoted, so they were making sports apparel one day and now they're making medical gowns. Who is my customer? That is the question we got over and over again. Who is my customer? Is there a PO at the end of this process? How do I sell to them? I've never called on a hospital before. I don't have any established relationships. That was a real challenge and a real, test of some of these companies that they internally had to put themselves through to take their existing production offline and pivot and make something completely different that they had never made before in that investment. So that remains a challenge for some of these manufacturers, and we try to do everything we can, getting them introduced to other states, the hospital associations, et cetera. But that is, I think, a limiting factor at this point. Is the marketplace is very disorganized still.
So the next question here is, how do you see points of connectivity between MERT stakeholders and higher education across the Commonwealth, which I'll just speak from our perspective again, and then if some folks want to jump in. The MERT process has introduced us to new partners for innovation, for commercial product, for testing, partners that we did not have in March and we do have now. And they have also, higher ed, UMass, Lowell, MIT has been a critical part of navigating the FDA, researching the products that were in short supply and how we could, innovate or develop products more quickly. So I think that those points of connectivity for companies like ours have dramatically increased. And I think maybe there's some other folks who want to jump in about sort of where that goes in the future. Julie, do you want to? Julie,
let me jump in very quickly, but on the question, the academic partnerships are absolutely essential, and we would not have had a MERT without the partners you mentioned. And it really is really kind of in our DNA in terms of how we operate as a state. Not only do we have great academic partners, but we also work well together with them. So, and with that, I want to hear what Julie has to say about it, because she knows more about this than anybody.
It's the connectivity, as you say, that is the key. And I think one of the things that we saw, right, was it's so important from the higher ed side to also understand who our customer is and what they need. So by working with the hospitals, we understood where the demand was, right? What was it N95s? Was it gowns? Was it, right? What was the missing piece? And that's something that is important carrying forward, working with small companies like Boyd, right? Where are the problems that you need us to help solve? Because, we have some brilliant people at the university. They're looking to partner with in this case, the customer. Not that we're selling anything, but it's the customer, it's the hospitals, it's the companies that are saying, here's where the problems are. How do we work together to solve those problems? And oh, by the way, the one product we do have are our students, right? Our students are your next hire, right? The next generation. And we want them to understand this environment, because that's how we continue to make Massachusetts strong, right? The students that graduate, work at your companies, understand the importance of this connectivity.
Great, thank you. So maybe Secretary Kennealy, this one's for you. The response by the Massachusetts ecosystem has been inspiring. Has there been any exploration for a focused, funded initiative to organize and mobilize in response to similar challenges in the future to leverage the unique culture in our state? It reminded me of a discussion we had during your interview about the focus in the beginning of 2020 and all of the areas of innovation that the state of Massachusetts is investing in.
Yeah.
But
That's a great point. I'm glad somebody used the word inspiring. That's the word Governor Baker used when he first talked about the MERT. And this has been inspiring to watch so many people come together to help solve these problems. Should I be looking here? So, and by the way, the film is inspiring too. But no, it really is. It really is how we operate here. We have an economic development plan called Partnerships for Growth. And we call it that because that's exactly how we operate here in Massachusetts. We like to tackle tough challenges. We like to tackle them together. So yes, if there are examples in the future where we need to mobilize these kinds of resources, I have no doubt that we will.
Great, thank you. So this question, I think this is a good question. I'm not sure if there's an answer or not yet, but is there a commitment to purchase from mass sources once the pandemic is over? Carolyn, I know you talked a little bit about this. I mean, I think that's been a challenge for manufacturers really is this partnership with commercial partners who can help in the sales channel. I know I guess I would just say for us as a manufacturer, Again, the MERT has added value here by helping make connections. There's a number of people, companies and organizations that we don't normally engage with that we do now, thanks to the MERT. But is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, so as a public entity, we have to abide by, and I'm talking about the global we, the state, has to abide by procurement laws. And so contracts need to be competitively bid. That said, the state procurement office held a workshop with and invited all 50 MERT cleared manufacturers to a session to learn how to become a contractor for the state and to sell into a big institutional buyer called the Commonwealth of Mass. There's no free pass, so there's lots of rules that need to be followed, but it's a partnership to be able to demystify for these smaller companies how to access a big institutional buyer like the Commonwealth. So that partnership has taken place. Under the state of emergency, however, the state did sign a contract with 99 Degrees and with Marrow. And my timeline here shows that within 30 days of the state of emergency being declared, the state put Marrow and 99 Degrees under contract for 1 million medical gowns each. And in order to get that state contract, you have to have supply, you have to have a tested product, you have to have committed delivery schedules. So that's an example, 2 examples of big companies that pivoted really quickly at scale and were able to contribute to the Commonwealth's mission of supply of PPE.
I could maybe offer a perspective of a nonprofit that doesn't have to abide by procurement rules. We simply have to adhere to a budget. But we've really taken a hard look at our supply chain and made workforce safety an important priority. And given that we're now spending 5 to 10 times what we used to spend to try to have some sort of secure state-based supply system for at least a portion of these commodity items is going to be a very big part of our security. We really understand the manufacturer's point of view. If they're going to retool their shops, there's an investment there that they're going to want to recoup. And so we're now talking about long-term arrangements to get a portion of these commodity items from local suppliers.
Thank you. There's a question here that I'm going to address just because I think it's a really important question for manufacturers, and if anyone else wants to jump in, please do so. The question is, traditional PPE supply chain markets will start to come back, so how will mass companies try to compete in a timely manner? I can't speak for all of the manufacturers. This is obviously a critical part of our business. We are competing with automated equipment, with really talented staff to do the development work that needs to be done, the regulatory work that needs to be done. We've signed agreements that go out 5 years that are competitive products. These products are competitive to the overseas product. I think there is a concern about an oversupply of some of these products, and we'll have to reconcile with that. But I think it's not a correct assumption to assume that Massachusetts manufacturers can't compete on a global scale. We can't. We've been incentivized to do so through this process, and we're going to. We're going to compete. We're going to be running this equipment for 10 plus years in our facility. And so I think that's it's a really good question. It's a really important, I think, part of the recognition of all of this is that we can compete. Brian, you want?
Yeah, I would say if you need proof why we need to pay attention to the PPE manufacturing process, take a look at the testing results of KN95s and take a look at the spotty record on some of those and realize that, we're asking people to go face a disease that will kill them with equipment that is not going to do what it says it's going to do. So, maybe if we have collective amnesia and forget what we just lived through, God, I hope we don't, we can start going back to the old ways. But until then, we should start really paying attention to where the protective equipment we're sending our most important people comes from.
I would also say that through the grant program, the MERT grant program that Secretary Kennealy stood up, that we have delivered $16 million in awards to manufacturers. There was a pretty rigorous application process. And in that, we saw innovations on PPE coming through. So some folks have said, well, when's the last time an N95 mask was ever, the design was ever changed and innovated against? And we've seen some of those innovations come through, whether it's through a gown design or the N95 mask design. I mentioned ventilators before. So that is also how we will maintain our foothold, is just through innovations around PPE.
Yeah, and just adding to that, innovation is the key, right? We don't want to be a state that's competing on the lowest level, the cheapest, simplest. We have the ability, because of the ecosystem we have here, to innovate and create the next level product that will be competitive globally.
I also think that, as an organization, Berkshire Health Systems, we've taken the time to try and make sure that we're good partners with our vendors as well. So, for example, photocopy paper, we buy a lot of it from a local vendor, and some will buy it a national. We find that blend. And I think the same applies here with some of the PPE. And there are times when we should pay a bit of a premium to know that we've got a supply chain that we can rely upon. And doesn't mean there's 100% of that, but there's blends that we can have. And I think innovation is really exciting. It's good to hear that the N95 might look or feel a little bit different for our folks, or even provide some more safety than what we have today, which I think is so important when we're dealing with a pandemic, because at the end of the day, it really is about providing great care. And the only way we can do that is by knowing that our caregivers are safe while they're doing their jobs. And so that's what's really critical about all of this. So I applaud all the innovation that's going on, and it certainly has opened our eyes to the supply chain and the need to have good relationships to understand where products come from, and that sometimes it's worth paying a little bit more for that assurance.
Great. So we have time for one more question, and this is a question from the audience that I think is a great way to wrap up. The question is, and I think I'd like to take a stab at it, and maybe everyone would. Thank you for this film. What would you like to see in response to presenting this story? What did you discover in making this film that was surprising or new for your experience? I think for us, part of what we really hope comes from this is an awareness and an interest in manufacturing, especially for young people. You can have a great career in manufacturing. It's high tech. It can be a very prosperous career, and it exists here in the Commonwealth. And I think we've known that just because of our business, but we've learned so much more about all the other businesses that are here in Massachusetts manufacturing. And that's just a really important component of this for us. And I would just also add, this has been a surreal experience for me and for everyone at Boyd Technologies. The people in this room are inspiring. And to be engaged with them through this process is, it's just not something we ever thought would be the case. It was not in our strategic plan in 2020. And I think these connections, I hope, will last for a very long time and change the way we do things in the state. And so for us, it's just been a tremendous experience. But Secretary Kennealy?
Not much to add to that. That was a great explanation. It is amazing to be with this group of people and think about what's been accomplished the last 6 months. And it's just terrific. It's great to be here back in the BIC, and we have high hopes what the BIC's going to be as well. But I think you're right, Matt. I think hopefully if this doesn't prove that manufacturing is a dynamic, innovative, exciting place to spend time in your career, I mean, I think it really shows it here in spades. And I want to acknowledge that what all Steve and Matt have done, both in terms of producing the film, all you've done during the crisis, what you've done here to help build the BIC as well. I won't ever forget the late night Sunday phone call in March when all this was unfolding. But you've been terrific partners in all this.
Thank you. Brian?
Well, I'll say, first of all, thank you to you, Matt and Steve, for everything you're doing. The movie to me really reminded me that we're still in the beginning. And that's kind of the scary part, right? We're still learning, and the beautiful thing about everybody in this room is that everybody kind of came together and did something to try and save the Commonwealth. And I'm really proud to be from Massachusetts, and I'm proud of the work that has been done. I will say, for everybody out there who thinks like, oh, well, let's make some PPE, we'll make some tests, and we'll get through this. Think about this, right? I mean, there are so many other side effects to a pandemic. Mental health. I mean, people are not okay. And, I'm not afraid to admit, I'm not okay. This is the first time I've been out in a long time, and I'm pretty pumped about it, obviously. I've been pontificating to a 13-year-old and an 8-year-old. But I think we need innovation throughout the whole, our entire Commonwealth needs to think about how we innovate, the way we, deal with our mental health, the way we, think about our public schools, the way we think about the long-term impacts, healthcare of COVID. The thing that's so incredible to me about COVID is a perfect virus. In one respect, it knew exactly who to attack and when to attack for people to be ambivalent about it. And it's, it has exposed the weaknesses in our healthcare system in terms of people of color, people of low means. We need to do better, and we need to innovate in how we make sure that people are better and get better, and how they stay better. There's 6 million people in this country who are going to have recovered from this, and there's going to be many more, and they're going to have long-term health impacts. Our job in healthcare is to think about how we continue to raise the bar and innovate in that, but then how do we use that innovation to lift up our healthcare system so that we make sure that people don't fall through the cracks anymore. If we don't learn that lesson after all this, wow, what did we do?
Thank you, Brian.
I think the film for me, the secretary referenced the DNA that we have in the way we do our business around economic development, where we bring industry together with government, with academia. And that's what occurred with the MER. And in watching that film, the formula really works. I mean, it was put to the test. And we have been successful, because right now the number of PPE put into the market is just over 9 million pieces. And it's complicated stuff. It's not just the simple stuff. So really, really proud of the work that the manufacturers have done. I'm proud of the way that the team has supported those manufacturers, kept focused on them as they went through their journey to be able to put this safe, reliable PPE that was sourced and made in Massachusetts into the hands of our frontline workers.
I found the film to be uplifting too, and so I wanted to thank Boyd Tech for taking the effort and putting it together. It's an important piece of the history, important part of the story of COVID. For me, I really didn't think a lot about the manufacturing sector before COVID. I had my head down working in the healthcare space, and all around me when this thing broke, I saw tremendous ingenuity, energy, and commitment. And then to learn that the same thing was going on in the manufacturing sector, it was like finding brothers in arms, these guys were part of you guys and gals were part of the fight too. And it was a great thing to see. And it said to me, it's more than a story about manufacturing. It's a story about the spirit in the Commonwealth and the human side of how we all responded to this pandemic.
I think about the fact that, you're reminded in this movie that it has been 6 months and it feels like it went by with a blink of an eye, and that we're just at the beginning of that. And I want to thank Boyd Technologies in particular for, exposing us and making the connections to the distribution channels that you had that we knew nothing about, that helped us in the early days to get some of the critical PPE that we needed. And I'm really excited about what Massachusetts has to offer as we go forward. There's still a lot more to do. And there's a lot of work, I think, on developing testing platforms and testing kits and all the media that we need. And, an earlier question was about getting COVID under control. And we really won't be able to do that until we can test people all the time. I mean, I envision a day where we can take a test before we walk into a restaurant so we all know everybody is negative and we can enjoy our dinner. You know, that's when we have success. And that's what normal life is going to be for us again. You know, we might never find a complete cure. I mean, HIV was in 1980, and I'm reminded every day by our physicians that, you know, we still don't have a vaccine for HIV. We've learned how to treat it. And that might be how we're going to have to live with COVID as well. So I applaud the ingenuity and the creativity and the partnerships that have come about as a result of this virus. And I hope that we learn to continue to work in that manner as we move forward.
So coming from a university, lessons learned is important, right? And I think we have to, as Brian said and others have said, we can't forget, right? The things that worked, the things that didn't work so well. And one of the things that we want to make sure that we do is to, if you think about those spider charts that Ben Linville Engler were amazing at producing, that showed the connections and the nodes, we have to think about how do we learn how to hardwire those connections in so that we don't have to depend on serendipity, that we have that ecosystem. And I think we've learned, we've created those connections. We have to make sure that we remember and strengthen those connections.
Unfortunately, with that, we are out of time. Thank you for bearing with us and attending virtually. We're planning to release episode 2 of Project Frontline in early December. And our goal is to continue this thoughtful discussion that we began here tonight. You can be an active part of that discussion by following us online on LinkedIn and YouTube. There have been a couple of questions about providing a downloaded version of this panel and the video. They will both be online, so you can check there. I'd like to close by thanking our panelists for being here tonight, and most importantly, for doing what you do every day. I'd also like to thank PJ Moynihan and Digitalized Film, and the entire team at Boyd Technologies, in particular, Stephen Boyd and Linnea Morrison. Without all of you, there would be no Project Frontline. And lastly, our hearts go out to those who have been impacted by this virus, directly or indirectly. And we are inspired by the selfless healthcare workers who around the world are on the front lines fighting this pandemic. Thank you for your interest and your support, and thank you for being here tonight.